Hello everybody, welcome back to the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast, brought to you in probably the best surroundings that we're going to be in all season. To be frank, we're here in Austria, in Tyrol, covering Norwich City's pre-season. We've been based in St Johanna for the last couple of days. Obviously Norwich City played Hoffenheim here on Tuesday. This is our last night actually. The curtain is falling on the Austrian trip, and then we'll be back at Carrow Road ready for that game against St Pauli on Saturday. I'm Connor Southwell, joined by Paddy Davitt and Adam Harvey, and of course this podcast is brought to you by Chips Away Norwich, whilst who have been very kindly to cover the entirety of our pre-season tour. Paddy, what lovely scenery we're in. We'll try. I've realised that there'll be audio listeners, so I better try and paint it. We've got so as I look to my left, I can see trees. As I look over my other shoulder, we've got mountains. It's a really beautiful part of the world. This,
and we're on your archetypal alpine decked area, surrounded by. Forgive me, I don't know the type of flower. We're surrounded by a bit of lovely purple chrysanthemum. I'm going to go with. That's probably wrong, but you couldn't get more chocolate box. Basically, think Sound of Music, as my wife has been reminding me when I've send her pictures of the location, and of course the piece de resistance is behind us for people watching. For those listening, it's a lovely mountain range, which I don't think we're giving anything away to say that certain members of Norwich's coaching team / technical department might have been up at the top of that earlier today on a cable car, and we'll probably get into that in due course.
Not for me, Adam. This is we were here last year. It was obviously we were in Kufstein last year. We did a pod. I think it was outside a train station. We kind of split it, so it's nice to actually sit down and be able to record one and showcase what is a really beautiful part of the world.
Yeah, I think this doesn't differ massively from Kufstein, but certainly I think we were speaking when we first arrived here. Kufstein was more like a bowl in terms of the feel of it. They were sort of all the way around you. Here they're sort of behind you, but not directly kind of in front of you. So yeah, it's quite a nice sort of blend. The little town which we've sort of walked through a few times on our travels. A really nice little sort of square there. I think it's a church and sort of a memorial and some nice sort of restaurants and
Plenty of wasps.
Yeah, and plenty of wasps that we've been trying to bat away as we've delved into sort of fizzy drinks. I think the sugar or whatever. There's been a sugar pot on the table that they've been having a field day over, so we've sort of been trying to move that around and battle those away. But aside from that, it's been a bit too hot, but the actual place is beautiful.
We'll get into the football in just a moment, but Paddy, we've today, which is Wednesday as we're recording this, I think it's probably going to go out a little bit later because we've got some extra things to squeeze in, which is a nice segue because today we've been having a very good chat with somebody very close to the Norwich City first team.
Very close, about as close as you can get to Johannes Hoff Thorup, and that is his assistant head coach, Glenn Riddersholm, fellow Dane. Lovely to be able to go down to the training base, which was about a 40-minute bus ride from here. Very pleasant, free, I might add as well, which is again, not sure you get too many free buses in the UK, but we don't need to open up that can of worms. But for some reason or other, connected to our hotel, there was a regional ticket which entitled us free bus pass, and as a result, a very pleasant journey was had. And then we had a good 40-odd minutes sit down with Glenn. First time I think he's done any real media, certainly external media, and a fascinating guy. And we tried to, as much as we could, get under the skin of his coaching path, and that in itself was very engaging. But then turning it towards Norwich and why Norwich, what was the attraction, the relationship with Johannes, that chemistry, and some really interesting stuff about the academy and developing players and what might be ahead in the next 2 or 3 seasons. And obviously I'm just trying to work out, this will already be out after we've put out the Glenn interview. But if you haven't watched it already or listened to it, go and do that now because, make no mistake, he and by definition Johannes are on a mission to get Norwich in that Premier League in the next 3 years.
Yeah, it was interesting, wasn't it? How he kind of laid it out as it was almost a 3-year plan, which I guess is the length of their contract. So there's not a lot of thought in terms of they're sticking to that sort of timeline. And I think he even said, "Look, if it happens in year 1, brilliant." But he was really interesting, wasn't he? Quite a character. There's a lot of personality there, and I think you could, or certainly I could sense that if you were a player in the dressing room, I think you would become quite a likeable figure pretty quickly.
Well, just on that, I mean, you said, he said year 1 would be great. Year 2, they would hope to be really good. And year 3, I think, paraphrasing, year 3, we expect to go up. I think it was certainly as definitive as that. Maybe not that exact phrase, but if I'm a Norwich fan listening to that, I'm thinking, it might take a little while, and we got into that in terms of the process and patience. But I mean, there's no doubt, if you go and, as I say, consume that piece of content, I mean, we're already getting a clear sense of what Johannes Thorup is all about and why he's been attracted here. But to have that reinforced by speaking to Glenn in a fairly relaxed setting, I think I'd be fairly excited if I was a Norwich fan, albeit, this may be a slow burner in the initial stages of this, because it's obviously a lot for them to come in, and the expectation would be that they would have Norwich competing at the top end of the Championship this first season. I think there's probably a lot of work to do and a lot of building blocks to put in place, and we're seeing that through these pre-season games, really. I can't lie and say we've watched the team, whatever the makeup of the parts in any of these pre-season games, and thought this is a team nailed on for promotion. So, I think we need to be slightly cautious, but good to go and have a chat with him, and as I say, make up your own mind by all means. But I think if I was to go and consume that piece of content, I'd come away feeling quite positive about my football club.
And he's a PinkUn podcast listener.
Well, is he? I mean,
I think he said he was once. which is probably.
I mean, we did one at the Prince of Denmark, didn't we? Which had somehow or other bopped onto his radar. I don't know if he'd consumed it all. I don't get the sense he'd been in the Prince of Denmark. I don't think he's got enough time for that, but. He was aware of us.
He said something along the lines of, "You're the guys who are always in pubs," wasn't it? Something like that.
Well, I mean,
you're not helping us really.
Wrong. That's not far wrong. Anybody who's watching, I'm now lifting a bottle of what's this, Adam? Kaiser. Is that the local brew?
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah, it's we have a certain convenience store just down the road, and we thought we'd sort of delve in for one to while we
purely a prop, though.
just a prop for while we
you are drinking it though.
while we record this podcast. And apart from sort of a few more notable brands, I thought, well, we're in Austria once, maybe not necessarily once, but certainly at this time of year, so let's delve into something slightly more local, and this was what was on offer, so that's what we're dealing with.
I mean, I don't actually drink, so I've no idea of the quality. Is it any good?
Passable.
Okay, right. Let's talk about some football then, Adam, because as we said, I think it's I'm trying to it's hot. It's basically what I'm trying to say, and you could probably see that if you're looking at us. But I don't want to sort of labour the point. But it's been 32 degrees here today. I think it's reached at its peak. It was around 30 last night, although it did dip significantly by the time we left the ground. It was quite pleasant, but certainly in that first half against Hoffenheim, it was intense and it was hot. And what were your reflections? Obviously, I recognise you had quite a unique view because you were taking pictures, so you're pitch side, as we were second half, not taking pictures, but we were pitch side, but we'll tell that story a little bit later, because we've got to thank someone, so right. I'm putting that in your mind to remember. But what did you make of it? What were your reflections walking away from the Coash Stadion last night?
Yeah, I think there was definitely signs of progress. I think Johannes Hoff Thorup after the game probably sort of indicated that was probably the best performance of pre-season. Certainly the way they came back in the second half. First half, I thought they were probably playing let's face it, Hoffenheim finished 7th in the Bundesliga last year. They've got European football, and I think you could probably tell at that point that some of their better players were on the field, and maybe Norwich were struggling to get to grips with that. Then you've got the heat element as well, which doesn't exactly help when you're sort of trying to build up the play. And I think maybe they had to go longer a bit more last night than they'd want to normally, just probably to try and avoid having to do any more running than they had to. But for me, certainly in the second half, the way they sort of turned the game on its head, and they sort of took the game to Hoffenheim, and to fair, they had the chances to win the game. So I think you look at kind of the limited chances, I'd say they've maybe sort of managed to accumulate it in some of the other tests. This felt to me like the one where you're starting to see that sort of attacking fluidity starting to bear fruit. The likes of Borja Sainz, Johnny Rowe. I think Thorup spoke about him after the game and trying to get him more involved in chance creation and sort of being on the end of things. And I think that for me was a marked improvement from the previous games. So hopefully moving forwards into Saturday they can sort of build on that again, and then of course that then puts them into a decent platform then heading to Oxford on the opening day.
Yeah, it was kind of the reverse of Magdeburg, wasn't it, Pad? In that the first half an hour was quite tough to watch from a Norwich perspective, and I think that was probably shared by a lot of the fans who were maybe watching and following the game through other means. But from probably there was a drinks break, wasn't there? I think around the 36th minute, it was after the Hoffenheim lad broke his arm, and it does sound like he's okay, thankfully. But after that drinks break, whether that was Thorup being able to physically grab them and shake them and change a few things, or whether that was just the nature of the game. Obviously, at half-time, Hoffenheim made quite a host of changes, which aided their cause. But thereafter, it was significantly better, I thought.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. There was a shooting chance for Zara, which came as a result of, I think it was McLean and Nunes with those progressive forward passes, quick actions, and he got shot away. That might have been just prior to the drinks break, but that was the first sign you really felt that up to that point it had been, let's be honest, I mean, we were at the right end, and I mean, we were behind one of the goals, which is quite unusual for us to be situated there. And I think exclusively in that first, I mean, they were 2-0 up after 25 minutes, scored 2 in 4 minutes, and it was pretty much exclusively in and around Angus Gunn's final defensive third. So that had to change, and it did as the half elapsed, and they had 1 or 2 sighters. And then, to take Adam's point, I think Hoffenheim made quite a few changes at half time without having a huge familiarity with their squad. You would assume that some of their biggest hitters came off, and Norwich, as a result, took up the challenge, and inspired for me by Johnny Rowe. They were good second half, and Johannes labelled that, in his opinion, as their best game of the summer so far in the round. So a lot of positives, and hopefully a few more clues in his mind and in Glenn's mind to their thinking for Oxford. It might have just crystallised a few things, maybe.
Yeah, and this maybe goes on to Friday as well, but I've been, this is a point for both of you, I want to get both your thoughts on this, but I've been slightly surprised, and maybe all we have really to gauge, there wasn't very many people at Magdeburg, but I think it's fair to say there were a handful of boos, which were a little bit odd. But even kind of taking the temperature online, it's been quite a almost panicked response, I would say, to this pre-season. That's I found that a little bit odd. What have you made of it, Pad? Is it natural because that's the world we live in, and every minute that they play is broadcasted now?
Well, you can kind of see that on a slightly, albeit connected theme with the transfer activity brackets lack of. You know, I mean, they've obviously addressed that to a degree now with Ben Chrisene coming in the building. If everything goes to plan, Callum Doyle following relatively short order. So, but there was that post Cordoba period where with each passing week, where's the signings, and I felt anyway in terms of consuming that through social media that there was a degree of rising unease, panic maybe is a bit strong, but certainly things need to happen and an urgency needs to happen, and why isn't it happening? But they've obviously been very targeted as has been the case with Chrisene. That was quite a plan, quite a prolonged period of discussions with the player and with Villa, and painstaking behind the scenes. They kept it well hidden, that one, and things have been happening in the background, but maybe not as visible to the social media community or whoever. So is that being reflected in terms of the performances? Who knows? We can't really speak for anybody who's of that opinion. But for me, I do think, boos were, if they were boos, and they were boos at the performance on Friday last, that's borderline ridiculous. I don't understand where you're coming from with that. This isn't David Wagner. This isn't the same template. In many respects, it's the same players, but trying to play the game in a dramatically different way, far different to what they saw last season. So for me, that all those elements suggest this is a break, this is different, this is a new chapter, and as a result, it's a clean sheet of paper. Surely that you have to give these individuals who've come in, particularly in the summer, namely Thorup, due time to do what you need to do and put the fundamentals in place, and that's not going to happen in a manner of 4 or 5 pre-season games. It's certainly not probably going to happen in the first few months of the season. I think this is a longer process, and whether that bleeds to your point, that is that patience there in general in society, I don't know. It's a very deep area to go into on a football podcast.
Far too deep for us.
Norwich City, yeah, but certainly there seemed to be, if they were genuinely boos at what they did watched on Friday last, that seems remarkably premature for me. So we'll see Saturday. You know, they're back at Carrow Road, and St. Pauli will be no less a test than Magdeburg, and probably a much tougher one, as they won the title in Bundesliga 2 and are preparing for a season in the Bundesliga. So let's see what we get. But yeah, it's hard to fathom if there was genuine dissatisfaction at the first Carrow Road game for Johannes Thorup. I mean, that would seem, as I say, strange.
Yeah, and look, I don't want to magnify it beyond what it was, because it might have been 5, younger people, for example, and you get a very different crowd at pre-season friendlies, and I don't think we need to labour that particular point, but it just sort of fed into, I think, what's been the wider narrative, and I think you're right, because what we have seen is 4 weeks, basically, isn't it, of building a new style of play and trying to coach players and teach players different things. It could take 4 months, it could take 2 years. It is a long process, and I think I don't want to compare the two because it's very different situations, but you almost go back to that first Daniel Farke season. It does feel like we're kind of there at the moment in terms of what they're trying to do is different, and you can see it at points. There's been times in pre-season when Kenny McLean has tried to drop into the back three, and he's almost sort of checked himself and pushed forward. So there's been moments like that intuition isn't there, and pre-season's a period for, especially this pre-season, has been a period for assessment of players, and we've seen lots of young players get lots of minutes, and we'll come on to a few of those shortly. But equally, we've seen Thorup try different things. So a good example on the other night was Jack Stacey was tried almost as like a hybrid. In that hybrid, we've spoken a lot about this, about how they build up the back three, but they used Stacey almost and Montoya in the same way, where one would go and one would stay. We hadn't really seen that up to that point. It had always been kind of Stacey was the one given the freedom, and the left back was always tucking in. It was a little bit more of a hybrid nature. So they're trying different things and looking at different players in different conditions. So I think my point is really that the patience that I feel will have to be there is probably going to bleed into the season, because Norwich City, as things stand, are nowhere near the finished article at the moment.
No, I mean, look at sort of large majority of this squad was players recruited for David Wagner, what he wanted to do. We've only seen, now 2 additions through the door who want to play, Thorup and Napa signings that are sort of embedded to try and play the philosophy and the style that he wants to play. And I think it is going to be a time factor, that's going to have to come into play. You look at, you referenced Daniel Farke season, you had a lot of older guard players there that were still kind of, I suppose, levering over from the time before, the likes of Jerome and Russell Martin, etc. And you sort of gradually started to move, through the gears. They started to look into Germany and recruit players that, fitted what Daniel Farke wanted to do. And it was that second season that we started to really reap the benefits of that. And of course, we all know how that ended. So I just think it is going to be a waiting game. There's obviously lots of context as well. No Angus Gunn in that Magdeburg game, no Josh Sargent. The fact they had no recognised striker with, of course, Adam Eder out with a knock at that point. We can sort of delve into that later on in the podcast. But for me, it's just going to be a case of maybe a difficult season ahead. Hopefully not. As Glenn kind of said today, if they get a promotion this season, then great. If they do it next season, good. But for me, it is this longer term vision of hopefully in 3 years' time they might be in a better place where the style's been developed. They've got a squad that is capable of playing what he wants to do, and then maybe they can actually move up to the Premier League and try and equip themselves and stay there. Because I think, as we kind of saw with Daniel Farke, they almost done it a little bit too early. They didn't quite have the players and sort of the, I suppose, those that could suit what they were trying to do. And I suppose he also didn't want to sort of switch away from sort of his philosophy at all in the Premier League, and that kind of was a downfall almost in the end. So I just think patience is the key, and hopefully, more than maybe that little minority the other night will give them that time, because I think in the longer term it will be a benefit.
Yeah, it may well be a few steps back rather than one step back, and to hopefully then move forward. And I think that there does need to be an acceptance of that. And equally, we know how long a championship season is, right? Because you look at last November, Norwich were 17th, they finished 6th. So a bad start doesn't necessarily need to constitute a bad season. But I think, Paddy, just to pick up on what Adam said there, and I think you can sense it speaking to Thorup, speaking to other people in and around it, there's a real frustration that there have been probably a lack of opportunity for them. Last night was a good example where couldn't get Jose Cordoba in alongside Grant Hanley. Callum Fisher suddenly dropped out. So there's been little things like that that's probably prevented them from building up a real consistency of team and to start to build some of those relationships that Thorup has spoken about on multiple occasions.
And they're vital. They're vital. I mean, take Cordoba. He's their marquee summer signing, and he's played 15 minutes. Partly because, of course, he went off to the Copa America and Panama had a good run to the quarterfinals, so that delayed him linking up. But wasn't able. They didn't felt a little bit of tightness in the thigh area when he woke up on Tuesday morning, having been down to start that game against Hoffenheim. No precaution. Well, every precaution, no risks taken, as was the case with Duffy and Fashnacht earlier in the summer. But we're now on the cusp of one more 90 minutes before the real business begins at Oxford, and you wouldn't really want him having to play too many minutes on Saturday if there's a little muscular issue there at the minute. So that isn't ideal, because I'm pretty sure when he was first signed, sealed, delivered, and you're asking Thorup what you're looking at in terms of central defensive options for Oxford, when it matters, it would have been Cordoba +1. That might not be the way he's able to go now, so that isn't ideal. Callum Fisher would have started at left back yesterday. He's been very impressive in a variety of roles. Tonsillitis ruled him out. Obviously now we've got Chrisene. There may be one other addition before now in Oxford. But even if that is the case, and even if we'll still deal in hypotheticals, it is Callum Doyle. He's barely got to know his teammates by the time Oxford comes around. That's not ideal. So, the reality is that's the cards they've been dealt. They'll have to play them. We've not even got into the Eder situation, and now that's potentially destabilising and certainly a distraction that Thorup doesn't need when he's got all these other issues he's trying to balance in terms of distilling down a squad. It feels like being out here now and the players who've stayed behind, some of the younger players, I think in his own mind he's probably got that squad element, but it's a whole different ballgame then to go from there to what is my 11 for Oxford if everybody is fit and available. And I'm pretty sure at this moment in time he can't. If you were to give him a blank sheet of paper right here, right now, and a pen and say put down 11 names, he might be able to pick 11 names, but whether they'll all be available, you'd have to say probably not, the way things are shaping up. So, Longy, we've not even talked about him. He's been a regular in pre-season, felt a little bit of something in his knee, and again, no sense of risking him against Hoffenheim, so precautionary there. But it's not ideal by any stretch of the imagination, particularly, we were at the fans forum earlier in the summer with Johannes, and he, I think, said there that this was before they'd actually embarked. So I think they'd pretty much just come back, or they were just about to come back for pre-season. He felt that 6-week block was enough, but you probably want everything to go your way in that 6 weeks to feel that you're really in a good frame of mind and in a good place for Oxford, and that hasn't been the case, and that's not all down to him. So we'll see how they can navigate this remaining San Pauli fixture and then the last 7 days next week of pre-season. But for me, again, it's just another little bit of a cautionary note that not to expect too much too early, I think, because it's probably unrealistic to feel that, given all the issues we've just mapped out there, that they could really hit the ground running. It might happen. They might turn up at Oxford and put them to the sword, a newly promoted side. But if it doesn't happen, then I don't think anybody needs to be reaching for that panic button.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's absolutely, and I think that might be the case as the season goes on. I mean, you referenced a few players. Sargent obviously has only had 45 minutes. We only saw Angus Gunn exposed to 70 last night. There are players who again still are coming back. And that's before we get into all the various transfer elements and all of those various plates that are spinning. So all of that creates quite an uncertain picture at a time where I think Johannes Hoff Thorup would like there to be quite a lot of certainty. So you have to, as you say, that's the hand they've been dealt. So it's going to be interesting to see how they navigate that. And also I think you have to recognise the quality of opposition that they've played in pre-season. Again, that wasn't Thorup's choice. He's inherited this pre-season that was partly organised by David Wagner. So the quality of opponents has kind of been thrust upon him. The trips have been thrust upon him. So even that nature, if he was to design a pre-season, who knows, maybe it would look like this, maybe it would include a trip to the wonderful part of this of the world here, but equally it might not have done. So I think all of that is worthwhile context, and particularly Magdeburg and Hoffenheim played in a very specific way that I don't think we're going to see many Championship teams look to replicate, in terms of being quite man-to-man with their press, being quite aggressive, and also I think when you look at the Belgium trip as well, they played teams that were very much at different stages of pre-season. So I think all of that context has to be taken into consideration. One thing just to end part one that I wanted to kind of get your guys' thoughts on. We had a bit of a chat about Brad Hills on the last podcast, who has done very well and still very much in contention. Scored against Hoffenheim from a corner, which is good, and he feels like a genuine kind of threat in both boxes, to be fair, at set pieces. That right-sided centre-back role, if we're taking it, and maybe not for the Oxford, but definitely in the longer term, we are saying Jose Cordoba is the option there, and as we expect him to be. Who, given of what we've seen so far, Adam, who's your choice to slot in alongside him at right centre-back?
I think on the evidence, I'd still have to go with Brad Hills at the moment. I know he didn't get a lot of minutes against Magdeburg, but I felt Grant Hanley struggled a little bit in terms of the build-up play. And he's not comfortable on the ball. I don't really think he's ever been, a player who's, a natural ball-playing centre-back. He's sort of more of your traditional, head it, kick it sort of defender, which probably suits more what David Wagner was trying to do, particularly last season, where I think we didn't see the ball on the floor maybe as much as what Johannes Hoff Thorup will want to see with this Norwich side. Shane Duffy, of course, I know had a spell out there with injury as well, so we haven't really seen him sort of in a consistent, I suppose, team in pre-season to really know where he's at the moment. But I think that sort of leaves you with Jayden Warner or Brad Hills. But I think Brad Hills have sort of seen a little bit more of him pre-season, and I thought yesterday, particularly in that second half, obviously got the goal, but I just felt actually defensively, had a pretty good game. I think we spoke about him and what he'd done in the game against Club Brugge, one of their better players, and he sort of won all the duels in that occasion. He's seemingly comfortable on the ball, which maybe has caught me a little bit by surprise. I thought, sort of those maybe within the club and him being part of an Accrington side in League Two, I thought maybe he's not going to be as comfortable on the ball as he is, but that doesn't really seem to be an issue. But then obviously, of course, it does lend itself to he's young still. Will Thorup, be willing to run that risk of, Cordoba, who's never played in the Championship and played limited minutes in pre-season, and Brad Hills, who's, never played at this level before. So I think that could be a huge risk. And would you maybe rather go to Oxford on the opening day with an experienced body next to him? But I'm all about risk in life, so I'm going to go with Brad Hills.
That's a philosophy to live by. One thing I did think about Tuesday, which I think has gone a little bit under the radar. I thought Shane Duffy was quite good actually in terms of on the ball. It's not to say, and it was a good pass for John Rowe's goal, so maybe a bad example, but by and large there wasn't anything flashy. But you mentioned Hanley there. I think it's been quite noticeable that, and look, it's not Hanley's fault, as you say. It's not. I still think he's one of Norwich's best defenders, but in terms of ball players, not his strength. And I think he would probably openly admit that. Where Duffy was slightly different was everything he did was quick, and it wasn't like he was pinging passes left, right, and centre. It was literally a case of get the ball, give it to someone else, and he just did that constantly. And for the way that Thorup wants to play, that pace and that intensity feels as important as the quality.
Yeah, I'd agree with that breakdown actually. And while I take Adam's point, I think if, again, we're in hypotheticals at this stage, if Cordoba is fit and available for Oxford, you have to go with an experienced head, because not only the fact that he's had pretty limited pre-season, but first Championship game, first game in England, that's a big call to play him alongside Hills and make him almost a defensive leader. So I think you'd have that. And for me, of the two, as you mapped out there, Connor, I would go Duffy. So Duffy and Cordoba for me against Oxford. And but Hills is definitely in the conversation now, which at the start of pre-season, for the reasons Adam mapped out there was a kind of, well, can he put his hand up? He has put his hand up definitely now, and I'll be very surprised if they allow him out of the building. So I think he'll be in and around it and pushing those two senior ones along with Cordoba now.
Yeah, Stevenage feels like a good moment for him, doesn't it? In terms of in the Cup, comes after that opener at Oxford. That feels like it would give him an opportunity in a competitive environment against League One opposition. And of course, he was still playing at League Two level last year, so that's still a step up from where he was last year to really showcase himself. Just to end part one though, Pad, just because I don't think we'll get it anywhere else. Gabe Forsyth, 17 years old, featured in every pre-season game. I think you asked Thorup about him last night. First and foremost, that that pass, and people know what I'm talking about, to Ornel Hernandez in the second half was absolutely outrageous. But more generally, his performances have been quite something for a lad of his age. It's quite remarkable, because you watch him play, and then you almost have to remind yourself that he's 17. And that's not to say that he's close to it or that he's going to get loads of minutes in the Championship this season. But I think in terms of potential and opportunity for him, this pre-season's been pretty mega.
Well, I mean, again, it's the template that they want to develop young players. They want to create pathways and they want to give them opportunities, and then it's up to them to take them. And that young man there, as I say, I did double check that just before we started to record, and he has. He's been on the pitch in every single pre-season from Northampton onwards to Hoffenheim yesterday, Tuesday. That's quite a vote of confidence from a new head coach in a 17-year-old who was nowhere near it under Wagner. To be fair, maybe out of necessity towards the end of the season, we saw Ken Abbo, we saw Finlay Welsh. We'd seen a little bit of Warner earlier on, and Tompkinson not so much, but Fisher, Callum Fisher, yeah, but certainly not Forsyth. And you wouldn't say he'd had a standout season at development level. His first season, he came from Hamilton this time last summer. Reportedly a 6-figure fee for a 16-year-old. So clearly Norwich thought something of him then, and probably had to beat off competition for him. But 12 months on, and you're right. I don't think he at this stage you could talk about him in terms of he will be anywhere near Norwich's 11, maybe even their matchday squad. But to pick up on what Thorup said in that answer, he said the potential is there. Everybody can see the potential. You have to place the trust in young players. You have to give them minutes, give them opportunities. But these, I think his words were, these next 6 months now will probably decide the rate of progression. If he maintains the levels he's shown in pre-season when it really matters, then we might have to revise that and maybe feel he is actually justifiably in the mix for first team, which at the age he is would be quite remarkable, really. But you never know with these players. We were speaking to one or two of the Norwich officials, weren't we? And they not so much about Forsyth, but about Callum Fisher and how he's grasped his opportunity this pre-season. And the person we were speaking to were talking about, he was bought as a development signing this time last season from Bromley, came in, hit the ground running, really impressed David Wagner, and that was a factor in allowing Barley Mumba to go. So you never know. You give these young players an opportunity if they've got the right mentality and they feel they can belong in that environment. And he clearly, by what he's producing on the pitch, feels comfortable in that environment with senior professionals. So let him go, take him off the leash and see what you can do. And there's no doubt, I mean, you pointed out, I think, one of the diary room pieces that the club have put out, the one with Gibbs and Rowe, was it? There was a reference to how good he is technically and how impressed some of the maybe more senior players have been with him. So there's absolutely no doubt that he's a young man who has separated himself from that development pack and is very much now in the thoughts of Thorup and Riddlesholme. Whether it's in the shorter term, whether it requires maybe a loan, who knows? But to reiterate, at 17, to have been in and around it and playing and on the pitch, you can't do too much more, really. And it's great to see, because let's go back to the discussion we had with Glenn earlier today. That's what you want. And I'm sure if you ask any Norwich fan, they want players who have been part of that academy, whether they've come in at an earlier age than he did or whether they've been signed, towards their mid to later teens, but they've been finished in Norwich's academy. You feel they're one of Norwich's academy players, and they go on then and prove themselves in a first team environment. There's no better feeling, I guess, to feel that it's one of your own in that regard. So good to see, but again, to parrot what Thorup said, let's not overhype him, or him or any of those younger players. Let's give them opportunities and see if they take them, and then you can look back and say, yeah, that kid is now broken through and he's now a bona fide first team option. But yeah, that pass was off the dial. It was funny, we were that close to where the analysts were pitch side second half, and after the final whistle, Neil Adams was straight over to the analysts, wanted to rewind and see the footage of that actual pass, the big diag that he threaded through two Hoffenheim players for Arnell to run on, and led to a passage of play where Nunes hits the post and Chrisene should probably put the follow-up away, and that would have been a win. So, yeah, if he could do it against Bundesliga opposition, then it bodes well in terms of his mentality and his character.
Indeed, it was. Yeah, I think if Andrea Pirlo had played that pass in his prime, he'd have been proud of it. Right, part 2 coming next. Adam Eder, transfers, Chrisene, all that good stuff. See you in a second.
Got a paintwork scratch, bumper scuff or minor dent? Want it fixed like new? Of course you do. At Chips Away, we don't judge, we just fix it. Enter a few details online for a free, no obligation estimate. We'll come to you, or you can visit one of our car care centres. For professional, affordable car body repairs with a lifetime guarantee, visit chipsaway.co.uk. Chips Away, like it never happened.
You're listening to the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast from Austria, sponsored by Chips Away Norwich. I have a car, you have a car, you have a car. We all know how devastating it is when you get a little chip or a little dent that you need fixing. Those guys will sort you out. You can check them out, all the links and the details. And of course, you'll have just seen the advert from them, as well as I get attacked by, is that a wasp?
Yeah,
if that stings me, that's not good. I've spoken up. We start
restaurant.
recording and they come in and swarm. One person we did need to thank, and I referenced this earlier, was Paul Stanley of the German Canaries, because we found ourselves in a little bit of a predicament at the Coassa Stadion last night. To put it politely, it was a little bit of a language barrier. I mean, I speak 2 languages, English and Norfolk. That wasn't quite enough to bridge the gap. Luckily, Paul lives in Germany, doesn't he? So he's fluent,
Yeah.
and he very helpfully got us into an area of the stadium that I don't think we'd have got in without him.
Correct, yeah, there was a very zealous steward who, the only stand which was situated behind the goal, as we said, which gave you an elevated view.
Only bit of shade as well.
We say that, but by half time, that sun had come round and we were firmly getting cooked. But without Paul's intervention, basically we didn't have the right pass. When we didn't have any pass, we just basically winged it. We blagged our way into the ground. But thereafter, to get into that stand, and the reason probably they were quite hot on the accreditation card was because no sooner had we sat down, once having Paul, smoothed our passage into that area of the stadium, then we were joined by the whole panoply of Norwich officials, players who were not playing. And God knows who else. And obviously the Hoffenheim officials were up there as well. So, yeah, it was quite bizarre, quite a surreal one. But thank you, Paul. Much appreciated.
Yeah, we said we'd mention him. So, thank you, Paul. Really appreciate it. And always good to see him and the travelling Canaries out here as they do. They follow in their numbers. There were plenty of yellow and green here yesterday. Adam, one person who was here yesterday, who there's been a lot of talk about, Adam Eder. It's been quite a few days for him. He obviously didn't play on Friday because of a knock. That was then followed obviously by the fact that the team were due to, or did travel out to Austria on Sunday. They caught a flight. It was a meeting initially, wasn't it, at Colney, and then they went to Norwich Airport to get a flight to Innsbruck before travelling across here, which is about an hour. Adam Eder failed to report to both of those, which obviously you can go and watch Johannes Hoff Thorup's post-match reaction from the Hoffenheim game, where he maps out exactly his thoughts on the matter. What do you make of it? It's a tough one, isn't it? Because people make mistakes. Only he will know ultimately whether it was genuine error or whether he was being badly advised or whatever happened. But it happened, and it's clear now. Obviously, he's going to be disciplined internally. It's unwelcome, isn't it? And I understand how difficult it must be as a 23-year-old having that much attention and that much speculation, and to have come back from a place where you were really popular, really successful, but also really enjoyed after what's been a pretty tough spell at Norwich the last few years for various reasons, well-worn reasons that we've been into in depth in this podcast. And I think we've always been pretty fair to Adam Eder, but that's for other people to debate. Even though he said he wasn't disappointed, Johannes Hoff Thorup, do you get the sense that privately he would have been?
Yeah, I think so. You look at kind of the whole way through this sort of pre-season, I think he's been quite vocal. Johannes Hoff Thorup, Ben Napper as well, in kind of mentioning Adam Eder and how much they want to work with him as a player. They can see him as a player who suits what Thorup wants to try and do. He's a young player who's come through Norwich City's academy. He's probably had those sort of stumbling blocks throughout his time here. Timu Pukki being kind of the obvious one that sort of stopped him getting in the team. I think maybe he needed a loan sort of a lot earlier that maybe stifled his development a little bit. And I can understand his frustration at that, but for me, it's a fresh start. Obviously, there's an opportunity for him to maybe buy into something that's completely different to everything that's gone before. And I know he's sort of, gone on record, in the past and maybe mentioned that he feels a little bit scapegoated, by the media, by the Norwich fans. But for me, if he's in a Norwich team that's thriving, he's scoring goals, he's going to get more chances in this team because this Norwich team is now built to create opportunities for him. If he scores the goals, he'll be loved, and I think that completely changes, maybe his trajectory as a Norwich City player. Obviously, there's probably a bit of him that knows that this interest from Celtic is there, and I completely get it. He's a boyhood Celtic fan. He obviously had some really great moments up there in from that spell from January through to the end of the season. The goal in the cup final, and I think he scored against Rangers, and all these various other the things that come into play. And I think obviously a chance probably of European football as well is probably a little bit of a a lure for him to maybe want that or desire that move. But he's contracted Norwich City, signed a relatively long contract here. That was ultimately on his terms, and the club's terms at the time, and nobody's made him sign that contract. So he, at the time, he's agreed to it, and therefore he's a Norwich City player. So for me, he should give 110% to Norwich throughout his time here. And if it was a genuine mistake, then that's fair, fair enough. But for me, it doesn't help the situation with all this noise and 'cause everything around him and everyone talking around him on social media. The last thing you want is this to happen, because it almost reflects straight away back onto him as he's trying to disrupt the camp, or he's trying to be a nuisance to try and push that move. And I don't really think any party benefits from that. Certainly not Norwich. They will obviously want him to hopefully kick on and have a good season with Norwich, or if they do, then decide to sell him to try and maximise the value. And him being disruptive, if that is the case, doesn't help the situation. But only he knows that. And I obviously back Thorup. From everything we've heard from him and the way he spoke last night to deal with this situation, I think the club internally will sort it out, and what will be will be.
Yeah, I, like you say, Adam Ida's not sat here. I'm sure if he was, he would offer a maybe a plausible explanation as to why it happened. And as I said, I can understand it must be difficult, because I'm sure he is hearing things from his representatives, and he's hearing things from even Norwich's side and Thorup and Napa, and I'm sure he's got contact still with a lot of the old Celtic players, and you can see how disorientating that would be. But equally, Paddy, and again, it might have been a genuine human error. We all make them, and he has apologised, and hopefully now it's a blip rather than anything really significant. But I can't help but think back to even players in the dressing room at the moment who have had to contend with speculation. John Rowe, Kenny McLean's had it relatively recently, albeit in a very different stage of his career. Josh Sargent, Gabriel Sara, we could list all of them. My mind goes back to Max Aarons as well. We were speaking about him earlier, the fact that he was very credibly linked with Barcelona on the day of a Norwich City game. I think it was against Preston, and went out there and played very well, and even had to take some jokes about being Dani Alves along the way. So, and again, you have to stress we haven't heard Adam Ida's side of the story, but from what Johannes Hoff Thorup said, and he did feel that the Celtic speculation has played a part in this. It is probably frustrating from Norwich's perspective that this is still playing out in the way that it has, and in the way that it is.
I don't see how any party wins in that scenario. Adam Ida isn't getting what he wants if it's a Celtic move. Norwich aren't getting what they want if it's their market value for Adam Ida, and Celtic aren't getting what they want because they're not getting the player. And so surely there's a better path. I mean, yes, Adam Ida isn't here to put his side of the story, but I'll go with Johannes Thorup, who said reasons that were not acceptable is what he got from Adam Ida when he did eventually track him down. So it's pretty clear to me that was unprofessional from that player. You're not telling me that he didn't know that he needed to be either A, at Colney for a meeting, or B, at a rendezvous point at a certain time to go out to Austria. I mean, that's dog-et my homework levels of excuse for me. So very little sympathy with that man, and it's a shame, because if he'd had come back and kept his head down and shown his professionalism on the pitch, which, to be fair, I felt he did in the 2 games in Belgium.
He was good at Belgium.
I thought he was very good. Yeah, it's very strange how it's sort of turned the other way now. First the knock, and then now this, unfortunate episode in terms of going AWOL. but that's where we're at, and everybody has to deal with that now. And there has to be some common ground between the parties, and it's not necessarily just Celtic. There's talk of other clubs. We know there was interest from Serie A. It might well be other clubs are monitoring, because that was a high-profile loan at a massive club with a global brand in Celtic. His goals, without going over the top, probably clinched the league and cup double. So, they might find that the interest levels that were there in January are probably going to be that and a little bit more. So, look, I mean, the only way Adam will depart this summer is if another club meet Norwich's valuation. The player is 4 years left on a Carrow Road deal that he signed with no hesitation.
It was criticised at the time as well from a lot of fans.
Yeah, well, I'm sure there's a lot of people now have changed their minds on that, given the way this scenario has played out and what he did at Celtic. But there's nothing, and it's not just him. It was the same with Nunes and Trabzon. We're now seeing it with Sara and potentially, clubs like Galatasaray and Roma. There is no sense, from you speak to anybody inside the tent, that Norwich will be flogging players on the cheap. Yes, we know the financial situation. They do need to sell players this summer. But there's a balance to be struck. And, for that reason, there's absolutely no... Because if there was, then why would Thorup need the distraction that this could become now around him if Norwich just wanted rid of the player, didn't rate him, didn't value him, were willing to take... reportedly 4 million was the sort of ballpark figure where Celtic were. Then you do the deal and he's gone. So clearly, they do value the player, and Thorup again. While the admonishment was clear in his words just last night, there was a lot about he's a good boy. We'll speak to him again. We'll bring him back into the group. We'll integrate with him. What you touched on, that this is probably the first time he's had to experience this. It's a very disorientating thing for him to have to deal with, because when it's Celtic, and we've seen it now, the avalanche of commentary and opinion and speculation that spews from mainly north of the border must be overwhelming, really. So to have to deal with day in, day out, week in, week out, as it has been now. So, but the top and bottom of it is there's no sense from the Norwich side of this equation that they will cave in to anything that would constitute trying to maybe engineer a move out of the club on said player's terms. So, if I was him and his advisors, you probably need to think about your strategy and where you want to get to with this. And if it is that you want him to get to Celtic, then there has to be common ground, and there has to be some sort of, win-win scenario for all parties, because right now nobody's winning, and it's not healthy, and it's the last thing Thorup needs to be dealing with. Why is Adam not playing? What is the situation with Celtic repeatedly? As we've discussed in this podcast, he has a lot more other issues in his in-tray that he needs to be dealing with to get this team and this squad ready for Oxford than, Adam going AWOL because he couldn't find his phone, or his phone was switched off or whatever. I mean, that's just laughable.
Yes, agreed. Yeah, and ultimately the pressure, if it needs to be put anywhere from him and his representatives, is ultimately on Celtic and other clubs to pay the fee that Norwich are asking, or at least get significantly higher to it than what they have at the moment. It was a £4 million bid, which is not going to get Adam out of Norwich City as things stand on obviously the terms that we've spoken about. And look, there are ways back for players who are in this situation. We saw it in the second title-winning season under Daniel Farke. I was at Bournemouth that day when Emi Buendia and Todd Cantwell were both omitted from the team, and Farke was very scathing about them and their attitudes, and no one needs to talk about what Emi Buendia went on to do in that season. So there is ways back for Adam. People make mistakes, they deserve second chances, so now it's up to him to use it in the right way and not to waste it, and ultimately that will probably define what happens next. And as you both said, really, it's not in anybody's interest for him to make this difficult. If it happens, it happens, and that needs to be the attitude, I think, going on from here. Adam, Norwich have made a signing, Ben Chrisene. Chrisene? I'll stop saying his name because I'll get it wrong. From Aston Villa. It's a total deal that could be worth over 7 figures in the round if everything if he plays for England and all of those various things and those clauses get included. There's no buyback clause, which Villa have included in deals around Jadon Philogene and players like that. 20 years old. I mean, we spoke to him. He seems a very confident, very likeable chap. Played in the Championship last year at Blackburn. England under-20 international. There's a lot to like about that signing. So much so, Aston Villa wanted to keep him and put a new contract on the table for him to sign. Clearly, he wants to pursue first-team football at this stage of his career.
Yeah, sort of came out of nowhere, and you sort of look at his CV and you sort of look at the numbers and you think, where's this sort of come from and what's the attraction with him? But then you start to delve into it a little bit deeper, and I delved a little bit onto sort of Blackburn Rovers fans' views on X, and they were all really disappointed that they weren't, able to go back in and try and make that a permanent deal, or even get him back on loan again, because he sort of said how he impressed and, was sort of a consistent performer. I think he only got 5 starts, but I think 16 overall in the Championship in that latter stage of last season, which, that automatically, helps when sort of trying to bed him into this, sort of league and the sort of gruel nature of the Championship. He's already sort of got that under his wing. He's part of an Aston Villa side that's now in the Champions League. I know, he's sort of been loaned out a lot of the times, and it's only one senior appearance, and that senior appearance came in sort of that mad FA Cup game against Liverpool. And I think you sort of look at his even going further back. I think he was the youngest player to ever play for Exeter out of their academy, only 15, and the pedigree is clearly there. You don't even at that sort of youth level of England, you don't get in unless you're good enough. And you look at likes of Abu Kamara and Brad Hills and Callum Fish, and we're speaking about these, as real sort of future Norwich City players, players that Norwich can hopefully progress and make, regulars in their first team. And there's no sort of real reason why Ben Chrisene can't be the next, one of those that can make that leap and that step. And I think maybe it might be a time element with him. I'm not maybe expecting him to be the one that's going to be thrusted in straight away and sort of the first choice left back this season. But then again, it only takes an injury, or if Norwich don't manage to get the left back, Callum Doyle, maybe over the line that they want to get, then he might be the one that gets the opportunity. And as we sort of saw with Max and Jamal, if you're a young player and you get an opportunity and you take it, and that's exactly what Thorup, Glenn Riddlesholme, Ben Napper, etc. have all kind of, reiterated throughout this summer. If you get, if you're a young player, you take your opportunities and your performances are good, then you've got an opportunity and you'll sort of get your chance to shine. So yeah, I think it's a real shrewd bit of business from Norwich. Look at the fee. For me, it's relatively low risk. I know we sort of spoke about Norwich's financial situation, but you can imagine, before all the add-ons, it's not going to be a huge fee for a player with huge potential. So I'm excited to see what he's going to bring. For me, yeah, certainly a sort of a signal maybe of where Norwich's recruitment is now at. You look at Cordoba and everything around him, and then you look at Chrisene, you look at even Callum Doyle, if they manage to get over the line again, look at his profile. All younger players with huge potential and huge ceilings, and I think with this management team, I think they can sort of coach that out of these players, and hopefully Norwich will benefit from that.
Yeah, and he seems like a player that's been recruited specifically for what Thorup wants to do as well, in terms of that left back tucking in. He's from what we gather about him, someone who's a lot better at performing that sort of role than he is going and hitting the byline in the way that maybe Jack Stacey has done. But I mean, Adam spoke about it there. Pad, we're still expecting Norwich to make at least one major sale. I mean, there's been a lot of noise around Gabriel. So he's not going to be a Norwich player come the end of the summer, is he? Is there any hope of him still wearing yellow and green come the end of the window?
Change his name.
to what?
So they can't find him.
Graham Smith or something like
that. Yeah. No. It's hard to see now. It's hard to see. I think there's a sense or a momentum now building, and the reality is we've probably not even got into. Well, we haven't got into the white heat of the transfer window, which is the last 2 weeks, 10 days. Caveat that as well. I mean, August 30th is the deadline here in England, but pertinent because it's Galatasaray, the latest club linked to him. I think the Turkish window rolls on as it did with Rashica, if you remember. I think it's the first week of September. It might be slightly later than that. So this isn't going to be done and dusted, potentially, even if to paraphrase to paraphrase Jim White, the old window slammed shut on the 30th of August in this country. There's still going to be a few nervy days ahead, but he's the one, unfortunately, I think, because of his numbers, the profile, the type of player he is, the age bracket that clubs will come for, I fear, and And if they, much like we had in the Eder discussion, if they hit the figures that Norwich are looking for with him, then it'll be shake hands and all the best, Gabby, and go on and make the career that anybody who's seen him in a Norwich shirt last season feels he can go on to be, which is playing at a very good level. Not sure Turkey is that level, if I'm honest, albeit Galatasaray are the powerhouses of Turkish football, but European football into the bargain. But
Champions League,
exactly, yeah. So there is a logic behind it, I guess. But the most recent reports in the last day or two, the clubs are in discussions, but a little bit far apart on valuations. But as I say, we've seen nothing yet, and that applies to Eder. That applies potentially to a Rowe, a Sargent scenario. It's not even got out of the starting blocks.
Yeah, and just to interject, are you surprised how quiet it's been on John Rowe?
Yes, at the start of the summer, you thought he might be the one who would have the as it's turned out, the sort of Zara focus really off the back of what he did last season. English as well, very important in terms of this market, young homegrown player. But then as it's elapsed, and some of the clubs he was linked with, like Palace, for example, they look like. I mean, did they do the Ismail Kone, not Kone deal? The Ismail Assar. No, but it looks like that's one. So it's almost as if potential destinations are now gone because those clubs have maybe pivoted elsewhere. Wolves was another club that linked with him, but I think they've been in.
West Ham, I've watched him a lot.
Yeah. So everything has to align really if the deal's going to get done, and at the moment there's no noise around John Rowe at all in terms of transfer situations, and Thorup was very effusive about him and his impact that he could have this coming season, and now he could almost kick on again from the numbers he produced last season. So yeah, as we sit here right now, if you were to put me on the spot, they do need certainly one big sell. If it's not going to be maybe an Eder and a Nunes and maybe one or two others, and if it was to be one big sell, that will be Gabby Zara. Yeah, sadly.
Yeah, what a sad note to end the podcast on. Let's try and inject some enthusiasm into it, Adam. I'm not even sure this is going to do it, but we'll return to Norfolk tomorrow on Thursday. Flight back to Heathrow, and then one train.
Victoria Line, then yeah. Two trains.
And then obviously back at Carrow Road for St Pauli on Saturday for the final pre-season game. And usually those games are the most important. I would look back at the Olympiacos game last year, and I think the 11 was the one that David Wagner selected to play against Hull. So you do usually get a good indicator, whether Thorup does the same, but every coach uses them differently. But they are usually the biggest and strongest indicator of how close the team is going to be to Oxford. Are you excited for it? As exciting as pre-season games can be?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think it'd be nice to be Saturday 3 o'clock kickoff. Carrow Road. I'd imagine there'll be sort of a lot more of the sort of younger fans we maybe saw at the Magdeburg game that are sort of taking in their first ever Norwich City game, and obviously that lends itself to a positive, obviously for Norwich in the longer term future. Hopefully, if they can generate sort of future fans. And yeah, I think it will be a clear indication of what Torrup's maybe seen from this Austria trip, and what he's going to now take back to Norfolk. And for me, that 11 will be as good as probably the one that will play at Oxford, unless maybe they do manage to get Doyle over the line before, and maybe he decides to risk dipping into that and starting him at Oxford, or maybe there's an injury and somebody else gets an opportunity. But I think if you look at kind of probably the back four and the midfield mix and the sort of attacking three, I think that would be a pretty good signal to what he's going to go with moving forward, certainly until maybe sort of the transfer elements all come into play and he has to maybe switch his personnel because of that. But yeah, I think hopefully it's a nice sunny afternoon as well at Carrow Road. That will help. But I think a lot of fans will be sort of excited for that, particularly when you got sort of 3 home games as well on the trot after the Oxford game. So it's going to feel like a lot of Carrow Road football. And for me, it will be hopefully for those fans who are at Magdeburg and maybe were disappointed. I think if anyone who's watching last night's game on the stream or seen the highlights, I'm hoping they can do another step forward, and maybe those fans that were you know, a little bit concerned, we'll have less concerns coming away from the St. Pauli game.
Yeah, I've seen enough this pre-season, and look, we'll do a longer season preview pod next week, building up to Oxford. But I've seen enough in this pre-season, I think, to make me feel encouraged with the recognition that they're not there yet, and they probably won't be for a little while. And hopefully that I think is the feeling. But look, if you're worrying, you're allowed to worry, etc. That's perfectly natural as well. That probably brings a close to this podcast and also our time in Austria. As we've mapped out, we've had plenty of content out here. You've got all of the interviews from Hoffenheim, all of our coverage around that. You've got the Glenn Riddlesholm podcast, which I recommend you go and watch and listen to. It's an excellent 40-minute chat. We're going to have the vlog as well, which may already be out by the time you've seen this. And then obviously, if all of that wasn't enough, we've got another game cycle this weekend against St. Pauli. And Paddy, to end it off, we've got a brilliant offer, haven't we, in terms of our app and subscriptions and all of that good jazz.
Why have they not taken it out now? Surely they need no further convincing, you know, after this week and Belgium as well. But if you do, then yeah, by all means, please give us a try. All the content we produce on all the platforms, you know, home and away, we've not missed a minute of pre-season. That'll be the same with the Championship season. Every press conference, you know, any news as we sort of build into that transfer window crescendo, we'll try and be across it. And, you know, for all of that, for currently £15 for the year, you know, we are biased, but I think you'd struggle to find better value than that. So, but if you don't want to pay that, then there's a smaller offer, £3 for the next 3 months. All the details are on our socials or on the PinkUn website. There's a pinned story on there now. You can find that. Give it a try and join the movement.
Indeed, Crescendo sounds like an exotic Dutch winger as well, so that's cool. Right, that's it from us. We'll leave you with a brilliant view of the mountains here in St. Johann, and we'll see you again very soon. Thanks for watching, stroke listening.